Joining us once again is Jessica Burbank, commentator, economist, content creator extraordinaire. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate that. I'm glad to be on, having met you in real life and knowing that Jordan's not
Yeah.
AI. I confirmed it for myself. And moreover, not just AI, but a good person to be around. Rob and I have not met in real life yet, but maybe one day.
I'm still not convinced that either of you are not AI. I don't know.
Rob and I haven't met in real life.
That's true, yeah. We've been doing the show for 4 years. Yeah.
Rob is a creation of Nvidia.
Yeah.
True.
That's right. I'm actually an experiment that's been conducted by Harvard University for the last 41 years, and the experiment is now concluded. So
yeah, we'll find out about the details of the experiment in declassified CIA documents. In 15
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Now we're even farther away as well. We used to be somewhat close, but now.
Well, thanks for opping us from afar, Rob.
Yeah.
It's very flattering to be opped.
It's my pleasure. It's an honor and a privilege.
But Jessica, we wanted to bring you on because I think you're one of the best progressive and MMT economic commentators out there. And we see this conversation played out almost every week in the media, online, and maybe even people experience it among their friends and family. There's a conversation around how the economy is doing versus how people experience it. And you'll have people in the media, you'll have pundits, you certainly have the Biden administration reiterating that the economy is strong, job numbers are up, everyone's getting paid more, everything is good. But then you see polling and even anecdotal, people experience different things. The cost of food, the cost of living, the cost of necessities feel like they are more expensive. And people still think that inflation is a big issue and it's affecting them directly. That still, despite these numbers, despite these metrics, presents an obstacle for the Biden administration and the Biden campaign going into re-election. So as an economist and as somebody who thinks about this and talks about it a lot, could you give us just a general economic vibes check? Is the economy good? Does that negate people's experiences?
I wrote this thing on Substack a year ago because I thought the debate that's definitely happening today was happening a year ago. It turns out that was just like me and niche headlines that were, at odds, right? And it was like, are we in a recession or not? And we did see a couple consecutive quarters of decline in growth. And usually we have that as like, so that means we're in a recession. Biden was like, even if we see 2 consecutive quarters of decline, we're not in a recession because we see all of these indicators that, the economy is good actually. And that feels very weird when the evidence in most people's everyday lives suggests that things are not going well. And so that means that we have to change the indicators that we believe are what determines a good economy versus a bad one. And so I wrote this piece that was kind of comparing this debate to the famous debate over the dress. There was a Scottish wedding. The mother of the groom or bride posted the dress she was wearing. Is it yellow and gold? Is it black and blue? And it turns out the lighting that you experience in most of your everyday life determines how you saw the dress. Was it like a lowly lit environment or a well-lit environment? That determined what colors you perceive the dress to be. And that's kind of how I feel about the economy. If you're someone who is in the investor class, you look at the economy and it's good when you can make money off of investing some of your existing capital that you already have. That's a good economy. And that's what we're seeing right now is macroeconomically. GDP is up. Profits are at an all-time high. Those things are supposed to be good. We're seeing some job growth. But what we're also seeing is inflation's a little bit stickier than economists thought at the beginning of the pandemic. Corporations have raised prices just because they can. And they're realizing that people need food, so they'll continue to pay high prices. Workers are being squeezed from both ends. We're having the Federal Reserve have this explicit policy of making more people unemployed, which means that there's a lot of competition for jobs, for good paying jobs, the jobs that allow you to pay your bills and have some of what you want in addition to what you need. And so when workers are competing for jobs, they're not going to be able to say, hey, pay us better wages, give us more benefits, and effectively organize unions, because the company will say, guess what, you're fired. There are a lot of other people who want your job. And so that's not good. That's going to keep wages lower than they should be in a situation where prices are so high. So everyday people are getting squeezed from both ends. They're being paid less at work than they deserve. And they're paying more at the store for not just groceries and things of that nature, but rent, the necessities to live a normal, decent life, to keep a roof over your head and food on the table. And so, the metrics are written by and for the people that are profiting off of wages being low and margins being high, and prices at the store being high.
When we talk about this idea that like the way that economists measure like the strength of an economy, and how a lot of the time these indicators that are used are kind of divorced from people's everyday material kind of reality. And I think unemployment is an interesting aspect of that as well, because that's one figure that a lot of people are pointing to right now as an example of this huge Biden win. Unemployment is so low. Why do people think that the economy is bad? People are really confused by this disconnect. They're using these kind of indicators, and they're looking at polling of a lot of people in America that believe there is a recession going on. And they're wondering where this disconnect is coming from. They turn to low unemployment as an example of this. But I think that's a really good example of how there sometimes is like very little connection between these economic indicators and the actual health of an economy. Like if you think about at the beginning of COVID, when these kind of unprecedented benefits were kind of expanded to so many people, including like increased unemployment benefits. And you think about someone that during that period had access to this like enhanced unemployment for like the first time in their careers and could actually take a moment to breathe, to spend time with their family, to buy groceries, to not be constantly stressed out. And then when these benefits are kind of slowly sunsetted and taken away, then they're back at work, or sometimes they're back at 1 or 2 or 3 different gig economy jobs. And while that might indicate that the economy is in this really great state, if you look at the jobs numbers, if you look at the person that was out of work and actually getting unemployment versus someone that's then, a few months or a few years later, hustling, trying to put food on the table on 3 shitty jobs for some tech company, and you ask them if the economy's good, they're probably going to say that things were a lot better when, they were getting these kind of benefits. And the fact that they have jobs now isn't necessarily this indication that things are going great.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an example of this?
Yeah. I like the example of unemployment as one of these metrics. That's kind of bullshit. Because it is. We have this definition of full employment at being a rate of like 5% sometimes. That's not full employment. Full employment should mean what it would mean to anyone if they hear that. When an economist says it, to have 5% of the country unemployed is ridiculous. Full employment should mean every single person that wants a job has one. And so the unemployment metric doesn't measure that for a lot of what you just said, because these are people who don't have enough work. They're underemployed. They're working these gig jobs. Your employment, if you're, an employed person, shouldn't mean that if it's a slow week of Uber Eats orders, you don't make rent. That's not what we think of when we think this person has a job. We think they are getting consistently paid and they're paid enough to live. We don't think that it's dependent on, who's ordering a wage slave to go out and get their burger, which is a weird thing we hear a lot, this conversation around, let me summon a wage slave from my phone to fetch me my food. But a big problem is even office workers are working way more than they should be working. They should be, working a job where they have enough time to go to the grocery store and cook for themselves, or like go for the walk to get the burger. It is, they're a victim of capitalism as well to an extent. But I do think it's funny to imagine like if a person had to talk to them in person and say, hello, stranger on the street, you look like you need money. Will you go out and fetch me food and I will pay you cash for you to bring it back? That wouldn't happen. And so it's weird that these tech companies are kind of capitalizing on the fact that it's very impersonal, right? Like these wage workers are working for a tech company. And it's weird because we don't really think of like food delivery as tech, but it is, because the app is really, where the owner comes into play. But so you have all these people that like are not working full jobs. They're not fully employed. So the unemployment number, of course, it's much higher when we think about it in real terms than in like the economic definition. There's also the problem of someone who's considered, not looking for a job is someone who maybe does want a job, but has given up because they can't find one that's good enough. They're not counted in this metric either. And so it's just not a very good one for measuring success in an economy, because 2% is still too much in my eyes. Everyone that wants a job can have one. And the fact that we intentionally keep people unemployed is a crisis in our economy. Why is the Federal Reserve and the federal government, who gives them, their directives, they have to respond to Congress's directives, why is it explicitly their policy that people will not have any money at all? They just won't have a job, and that's necessary to keep wages low. Their logic is that inflation will suddenly become a problem if many people are employed, because then they'll have dollars to spend into the economy, demand will be up, then in response, prices will go up. When we're seeing high inflation in an environment where we have extremely low unemployment, this logic has kind of broken down in the last 50 years. And this is something that Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, has admitted to, that the relationship between unemployment and inflation has gone weaker and weaker. We don't even really see that it's there anymore. And then suddenly, during the pandemic, it was like, all right, everyone, inflation's a big problem. Inflation is just a measure of price changes over time. So there's a decision maker at every single corporation that's saying, yes, raise prices on X, Y, and Z. That's what we really need to be focusing on. But the Federal Reserve acts like it's this science, and they stick a thermometer into the economy and they read it back and they're like, oh my God, inflation's high. We have to increase unemployment. How do we do that? We make interest rates higher. Now it's more expensive for people who want to invest in their business or start a new one to get loans from the bank, which is how growth happens in the economy. We outsource money creation, which is necessary for the economy to grow, to banks. Now, if it's more expensive to get that loan, less people are investing in businesses and starting businesses. That means there's less jobs. Jerome Powell said directly, during this period of the initial interest rate hikes at the beginning of the pandemic when inflation was a problem, he said, this is a really good economy for workers, and we have to fix that. And so that's saying the quiet part out loud, that like, yeah, there's a lot of jobs out there. They're good paying jobs. We need to make it so that there are less, so prices go down. When in reality, this wasn't demand-driven inflation at the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone was saying the supply chains were breaking down due to complications related to the pandemic. So with this excuse of, oh my God, there's inflation now, corporations decided to raise prices. And so going along with that and saying, you know what, we're raising prices with this excuse, we're making a ton more money, we can also ensure that while we're making a bunch more money, we use this excuse to quash worker power at a time when people were really paying attention to workers and saying, look how essential they are. The economy breaks down when they can't show up. And they really didn't want people to capitalize on this realization. Capitalize, probably a bad word to use in this scenario, but they didn't want people to use this energy to organize and see a huge growth in worker power. They wanted to stomp on that as well. And so that's really what led us to the conditions we have now. So unemployment is this very politicized thing in our economy. But instead, we think of it as this just economic metric. But it's really the crisis of how the federal government aids our corporate overlords in maintaining their power over workers in so many ways.
We saw last week, or the week prior, Target, Walmart, Aldi, a bunch of big national chains, from big box stores to grocery stores, announced they are all going to be lowering their prices. And within that, I thought was a tacit recognition that, oh, they did this, like you just said. They did this intentionally. And the reason that some people pointed out they were doing this was because it got so bad for consumers, for working people, that they just couldn't afford to shop there anymore. And there was this recognition among these companies, their CEOs and their boards. All right, maybe we went a little too far with the price gouging because we're losing our consumer base. We could do it a little bit, and we charge them more and we profit off of them, but we went too far. They didn't come out and say that explicitly, but that was my read. Am I off base there?
I think that's exactly right. And this is what I've been saying for quite some time, that there would become a point when, if you're not paying workers more and you're increasing the prices, suddenly people aren't going to be able to afford to shop anymore. And it's a supply and demand thing. There's applications of the principles of supply and demand that are very real. Sometimes, they're used to explain things that they just can't suffice to explain by these classical economists or neoclassical economists as well. But really what we're saying is, if someone's not paid enough to pay the prices at the store, they'll start buying less, going to just buying essentials. And we really saw this a year ago. I think it was almost exactly 1 year ago. It was in the summer that Walmart's CEO and a few spokespeople said in a meeting that ended up resulting in people sharing these statements with the press just deliberately. It's not like it was leaked or something that they were saying this. But the executives at Walmart said, we're really banking on inflation because we're getting so many more consumers that can't afford to shop at Target. They can't afford to get their groceries at their usual grocery store. They're coming here. So there comes a point when people have only so many places they can go to shop. And if the prices are high there, they're going to buy less and less. I always say that there can reach a point when, if people aren't paid enough and the prices are too high at the store, we're going to be like, why are we participating in this economy at all? Let's just go live in the woods and forage. That's honestly better than the life we're being given here. And so I think there's this realization that we're going to lose all of our consumers, or we're losing enough consumers that it's no longer profitable to keep prices high, where the volume of consumption they're getting and purchases they're getting is so much less that it doesn't justify the prices being high. And it's actually more profitable to lower prices a bit and get more consumers to come and shop at Target, at Harris Teeter, or whatever the big grocery chains are instead.
I mentioned the expanded COVID benefits at the beginning of the pandemic. In Canada, we also had CERB, where people could get access to some funds every month if they were because of all the various closures and schools closing and everything, losing income. And I think there's been this concerted effort to link the idea of the inflation that's happened since then with these kind of expanded benefits, right? And to kind of basically tell people that, see, when the government gives ordinary working people money to pay rent and buy groceries, it just causes inflation. Like you said, it's this kind of scientific process almost that just causes inflation. But of course, when this is the interesting thing about how this works too, is when the money, apparently when it goes down from the wealthiest to the people that have the least, it causes inflation. When it's going in the other direction, when it's going from the people that have the least, and there's massive handouts going to the military industrial complex. We saw in COVID, there was a lot of small business loans that were just totally forgiven. Apparently that does not cause inflation, but the other kind of inflationary spending, that's what you got to look out for when you're helping people get by. And it's I think it's kind of disturbing how this kind of meme has become kind of this accepted reality, Like I mentioned Canada. Now in Canada, we have people like Pierre Poilievre running and trying to win power in this country with the promise of reducing or cutting out this kind of inflationary spending, which is just basically now this kind of code word for austerity and slashing healthcare and education and all the things that conservatives want to do. But it's been given this kind of legitimacy through this kind of economic language, right? And it's really just a way to sever this idea that it's good policy, good economic policy, or good politics for the government to be helping out working people to get by, right?
Yeah, that's at the center of the debate. What is good economic policy? And it hinges on what is a good economy. And for most people, the economy is how they earn an income and meet their needs materially. That's their interaction with the economy. Most economists and people coming up with the policies, their interaction with the economy is work. It's, assessing all of these metrics. They're looking at the macro economy and they're really losing the forest for the trees. And I think it's a big problem with the field that most people define the economy in such a scientific way. You won't find economists that agree on a definition. When I gave this TED talk about, what is a good economy and how do we have a democratic economy, I had to arrive at a definition that I liked, and it's how people interact with each other to meet their material needs. And if we are in a crisis situation where there's a pandemic and people lose their jobs, how are they meeting their material needs? How is the economy functioning to ensure that happens in a moment where there is a sudden crisis? And stimulus is pretty much the word we have for ensuring the economy doesn't collapse because of, people being fearful. They don't want to spend their money. They want to save it. We don't want to go into a recession where we're not producing a lot because people aren't going into work. People are afraid to spend money, etc. Sometimes stimulus can happen directly or giving money directly to people to meet their material needs. That's okay. Money is a tool for ensuring people can interact with each other in a way where everyone's material needs are met and hopefully they can have some of what they want. To say that any new dollars entering the economy are inflationary is a very weird thing. It's almost looking at money as if it has the same principles of supply and demand as a commodity. That if there's more money, suddenly all of the money that's already in the economy is somehow worth less because there's more of it. That's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. The real constraints on inflation and spending are these new dollars entering the economy and going in the hands of someone with a high propensity to spend them? And are they going into many people's hands? Are we just throwing money out of a helicopter when, we don't need to? And suddenly there's all this spending happening. Companies are like, great, we have so many consumers, we can afford to raise prices and get some more money, make some more profit off of this. Demand is up, and so we're going to raise prices. When we see money entering the economy in an environment where people aren't spending right now and they don't have the money to, that's not extra dollars out there in the economy. That's not, a demand-driven inflation problem. Times of at the hinge of a recession, stimulus is necessary. Obama made the mistake of not stimulating the economy enough, and it really prolonged the recession. Having dollars enter the economy to spur economic activity is exactly the function of money creation. The real constraints are, can you resource the spending? Are there real resources in the economy that can be purchased? And that's not something that you'll hear most economists talk about, is how do we decide money creation? They're told, don't touch the money question. We don't talk about that, which is weird because then who will? There's really no field out there that gives an explanation for how money should be created, when and why. If new dollars enter the economy and they go to buy land, machinery, tools, and pay workers to be productive, that has the opposite impact of inflation. That's actually increasing the productive capacity of our economy and growing the economy. It can be deflationary, actually, and increase the value of, the dollars we have out there because there are many more goods and services of value to be purchased with the existing dollars in the economy. We never have this question of, is it inflationary to give money to the Pentagon? And there's a reason for that. It's because those dollars are going directly towards production. But I would argue that giving a bunch of money to everyone working in the defense, in the military industrial complex, all of those contractors that are extremely overpaid, we're overpaying for weapons. We've had so many scandals where the US pays more for the same weapons than other countries. That's extra dollars that are going into the hands of people. Maybe they'll spend them, maybe they'll invest them. That could be inflationary because those dollars are going to people in a way that they're not increasing productivity and they're not going to necessities. And so we really have to be careful of, these people that want to convince us any dollars going into the economy are bad or inflationary, because usually what they're doing is saying, oh no, we cannot give money to everyday working people. We need them to have this scarcity so that they will continue to work many long hours for us and we can continue profiting and living this comfortable lifestyle. And it's very obvious what was going on in the pandemic, because the data shows, this is data from the Economic Policy Institute that I refer to a lot, where they talk about where the money went made off of price increases. And during the pandemic, so after 2019, 2020 to 2021, when they collected data of the money made off of price increases, 53.9% was just going to corporate profits. Before the pandemic, only 11% of price increases went to corporate profits. So the money made off of price increases. That's from 1979 to 2019. That's insane. From 1979 to 2019, 61.8% of dollars coming in made off of price increases went directly to workers. After 2019, during the pandemic, only 7.9% did. It's like very obvious that they raised prices just to line their own pockets.
Seems like this big crisis was yet another excuse to funnel money upwards to the world's wealthiest people. What a shocker. We've never seen this before. I'm hearing this now for the first time.
Stimulus caused inflation is crazy. Like, you raise prices so that money would trickle up.
There was one other thing we wanted to talk to you about along economic lines before we get to our last story about Biden. And that is Nvidia, the large chip maker that many people might know if they have graphics cards or have a gaming PC. You're probably familiar with their GeForce graphics cards, but they just surpassed $3 trillion in market capitalization today. For people who don't know or don't fully understand what that means, could you explain that? But also, how did we get here? We saw a big push from the Biden administration to invest in chip manufacturing here in the States. The CHIPS Act provides $52 billion in subsidies for building plants here, for domestic chip manufacturing. I mean, this is something that it seems kind of suspect, handing over billions of dollars to an industry. On the other side, shouldn't we make those here? Wouldn't we want those jobs here? And as the world becomes more reliant on semiconductors and chips and technology, wouldn't we want domestic manufacturing for a technology that's going to pave the way for the next God knows how many decades or foreseeable future? So could you explain what the market capitalization means? And then, is this a win for the Biden administration? Is this a result of the CHIPS Act, or is it something else?
Yeah. So the price per share for the Nvidia stock today reached like $1,225, I think is what it closed at, which is a very high number. It's increased like almost 150% in the last few years. We've seen AI take off recently, and we've seen any AI-focused companies have extreme increase in the projected value of their stocks, increased investment in these companies, market capitalization. I'm not like a Wall Street person or like an investor person, but it's my understanding that the way it is calculated is with the remaining shares that have not been sold. If all of them were sold at the current price per share, what's the value for the company projected to be? And so there are very few large companies like Microsoft and Apple that are around this 3 trillion figure. And so this is a company that is projected to be extraordinarily valuable. Is it really? I think we're banking a lot on AI. Are we banking more than we should be? I don't know. I think a little bit. With my limited experience working with AI, it doesn't have the capabilities. Even artificial neural networks, which are some of the most sophisticated artificial intelligence, algorithms. It's not really an algorithm, because basically you're training a computer to make decisions based on rewards in a similar way to how the human brain works. This is how a lot of the self-driving cars, which is something that Nvidia is a part of developing AI for, this is a lot of the technology they rely on. And so I used it to predict what voters, based on all of the data we have out of everyone in the voter file that's registered, what voters were still undecided in 2020. And we fed all of our canvassing data and information about people from the voter file through a few different algorithms. We called it the dynamic and responsive targeting system. This was back when I was doing data science for the People's Action nonprofit and working with a team of very advanced data scientists at Berkeley. And so we're able to predict with significant accuracy more people that were undecided to talk to and say, what are you making the decision on? What policies do you like of Biden and Trump? Like, let's really think about this and not just vote on vibes. We had deep canvassing conversations with them. But the AI is only as good as the data that's, we're feeding it. And I'm not confident that all of these big companies that we're thinking we're making a bunch of money off of are going to be as great and all powerful as people think they are, simply because of the limitations of copyright law, but also of the data we're able to feed them. But Nvidia is this weird thing, and like just the whole world of chip manufacturing is this huge debate. We don't want all of this stuff to be produced in China, of course, because we want to have an economy that's resistant to foreign policy debates. We don't want like there to be sanctions placed on the US for any reason and suddenly we can't have semiconductors again. And we're seeing huge instability in various markets. I'm worried that the investment from the CHIPS Act, which is huge, we're getting a lot of public dollars poured into this. There are a lot of tax incentives for companies to invest in the manufacturing of these computer chips that so much of our technology relies on, including the development of generative AI, relies on here in the US. That's good. We have $550 billion of private investment, spurred through the CHIPS Act and the incentives put in place, a 25% tax incentive and all of these things the Biden administration has tried to do to get these chips manufactured in the US. We had some companies ship in workers from Taiwan and try and train them. They said, no, we need workers, trained in the US to do this. By the way, the conversation on the right is all about DEI. There's like a part of this that said we have to hire people from disadvantaged communities. That's why it's failing. Have you guys seen this?
I haven't, but I can just assume it's happening. Because
every single thing that they can ever, if they can just look up a corporate website and find some generic DEI language, that's the cause of all the problems, according to these fucking geniuses.
Chips are woke.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's wokeness in the chip manufacturing industry.
Yeah. After they're all complaining that the jobs are going overseas, that they're stealing our work, I'm like, this is exactly what you guys were mad about a few years ago. Just be mad about the thing you should be mad about, that they tried to bring in workers from Taiwan instead of hiring American workers. That's what's caused the delays. But there are projections, all kinds of projections, from Gina Raimondo saying by 2030, 19% of chip production will be in the US thanks to this bill. I'm worried that what we're seeing is people investing in these chip manufacturing companies because they're banking on AI. They want to invest in AI. They see that as much more profitable than these chips and semiconductors going to market and being used in like iPhones made in the US or other technology made in the US for cars and all of the various, technologies that end up in consumer products that need the computing power that these chips provide. So I'm worried that we're going to see the chips manufactured in the United States, but remaining in-house in companies like Alphabet or Google and Microsoft that are using the chips for their own generative AI, and that actually bringing the manufacturing home isn't going to benefit the consumer any more than if a Chinese company was making the generative AI or making the products. That seems to me to be the kind of power broking that happens in DC, that they're like, we need to pass this bill so that the generative AI happens in American companies and we don't have China having more AI power than the US does. I think it's really about that more than protecting the consumer, than the impact of inflation from the semiconductor shortage. And so I'm really worried about that, especially because Gina Raimondo is at the head of this. And I haven't seen any convincing parts of this policy that make it something that can be enforced. How are you tracking that the dollars are actually being used to produce these chips and that they're going to consumer products that will hit the market in the United States? And if not, what's the punishment? And so I think a policy is only as good as it is enforceable. Gina Raimondo oversaw, she was the treasurer, I believe is the title, of Rhode Island during the Studio 38 scandal. Have you guys heard of this?
Oh, what's that?
So Curt Schilling, pitcher for the Boston Red Sox,
Oh,
has
yes.
this video game
Yeah.
company. He is dealing with some Republicans in Providence, Rhode Island. Gina Raimondo being the treasurer of the state before she became governor. She's talking to them. Allegedly, she had no real say, is what her lawyer argued. They decide there's going to be a $75 million loan to this private video game company that Curt Schilling, beloved, is, the head of or whatever. And everyone's like, really? $75 million of local public funds? Like, not like the government, the federal government can hit a button and poof, they're there. States don't work that way. They have to get the money from either tax revenue or federal government grants. Like, these are dollars that they can't afford to lose. There are people who are homeless in Rhode Island who freeze to death every winter. No, they say, we are giving this $75 million loan if they move their headquarters to Providence, Rhode Island. This will be good for the economy. I don't know why. They didn't get any long-term indication that this would really benefit them other than job creation, tax revenue, what have you. They get the company to move in 2011. In the late spring or summer, within 1 year, they declared bankruptcy, and the state didn't make good on that loan. So do I trust Gina Raimondo with a policy where they're giving a ton of public dollars to private companies to produce something that will be good economically for the people she serves? No, I don't. Because policies, you really have to be explicit and say, yes, this money will go to the thing it's intended to, and there are consequences if it doesn't. There are so many deals between government officials and the private sector that just are a disservice to everyday people and really benefit the people who own these companies and invest in them.
I just can't believe Hall of Fame pitcher Curt Schilling's anti-woke video game company wasn't. I thought that was a sure thing.
Yeah. I bet you didn't know we'd end up here.
Yeah. I didn't tell you this, Jordan, but I invested a good chunk of our petty cash into that. So,
Oh, okay. Well,
you gotta swing for the fences sometimes, to keep with the baseball analogy. But we'll get him back next
climate
time.
change hoax, the video game, seemed like it would be a hit. I can't believe that didn't pan out.
Yeah.
I know. It is good because it's like an example of public dollars going to something that will spur economic growth, but god damn it, stop giving it to huge private companies.
Yeah. Especially private companies led by right-wing dipshits who are basically just getting a massive handout because of some political connections that they might have, and not any actual economic, plans or indicators that might actually contribute something. I think one person that we have to shout out, though, on the subject of this whole Nvidia thing, is Nancy Pelosi. I think Nancy Pelosi is just a true American hero. This woman could have been the greatest investment banker in history. According to Twitter account Unusual Whales, she's made $4 million off of her Nvidia options. This woman could have been the greatest investment banker in history, and she chose instead to devote her life to public service, very selflessly. And I think that's just one of many circumstances where we need to hand it to Nancy Pelosi for her selflessness.
Master legislator, also in 2023, beat the S&P by 63%. Am I reading that right?
Wow.
65%. Ma'am, please, you've done your service. Get to Wall Street immediately. Charles Schwab needs you.
Mm-hmm. But, of course, she wouldn't be a great investment banker. She's only good at investing because she knows exactly where to put her money, because she's responsible for regulating the market. And in the case of the CHIPS Act, allocating the capital to spur the industry's growth. It's disgusting. It should be illegal. And of course, she's now saying I'm all for the laws about Congress people not being allowed to trade stocks. And it's yeah, because you've accumulated enough capital at this point, Nancy. Are you going to give it back after you sign the law? I guess she wouldn't because she's not the speaker right now. But are you going to give the money back if that becomes law? She kind of rides the wave of what's popular, and the more people are talking about it now that we have Republicans in charge, she's like, yeah, for sure, ban us. Absolutely ridiculous.
Good for her. It's just really impressive. I'm just happy. A struggling working family can catch a break.
It's just amazing that when this happens in other countries, and so look at this like corrupt, autocratic banana republic or whatever. But it's just like the way that has been completely like normalized in American politics, and it's gone this long with no real laws or regulations in place to prevent the people that are making these laws from applying that knowledge to their own stock trading and financial activity is just truly amazing to me.
It really is. They're really relying on some belief that trickle-down economics is in effect at all. I was talking to my partner about this, and that was his take, is like they're relying on people still believing in trickle-down because, sure, there's a 2021 study that says for every job created of someone producing semiconductors, that there are like 5.7 jobs, mirroring it in the real economy because of just the growth that it spurs. But this is a study done in 2021. Now these chips are really going towards generative AI and that kind of computing power and crypto for some of these people using these chips. But I think the promise that their investment is going to be useful for real everyday people is ridiculous when the people immediately getting the money are the executives and members of Congress investing in the same companies that they're giving money to and regulating.
Let's give this whole trickle down thing another couple decades before we have a verdict on that. I think we should give it a little bit more time.
I'm glad you mentioned crypto and how many of these chips there are going to be. Tech Radar did a story. I was surprised to even see it mentioned in a tech site, but with this push toward these chips and just the expansion of AI in general, we're going to see millions of these types of GPUs rolled out over the next couple years. We went from just, I think, 2022, 2021, almost none were purchased. And now we're seeing companies spend billions and billions. Collectively, there's been over 50 billion purchased just in the past year and a half. They calculated how much just 1 billion of these Blackwell GPUs would use, how much energy they would use. 1 million of them, and there are going to be millions, they say, would suck down an astonishing 1.875 gigawatts of power. For context, a typical nuclear power plant only produces 1 gigawatt of power. They also acknowledge in this, however you feel about nuclear energy, we wouldn't even be able to build up to the point where we have enough nuclear reactors to supply all of these chips, and they're going to keep getting purchased, keep getting used. They're going to have massive data centers relying on these things, massive processing centers on these things. They're going to have to turn to traditional fossil fuels, whether that's coal, gas, hopefully renewables eventually. But the consequences for the environment with this push and with this success for Nvidia comes at all of our expense.
It's crazy. When I was leaving graduate school, I kept in touch with the teaching assistant for this class, the economics of inequality and public policy, taught by Professor David Seam. He was great. I'm not going to blow up this TA spot because it's unnecessary. And what she said to me is reflective of what I think any TA at any major university would say. But I was like, hey, there are a lot of industries that produce many dollars, right? There's so much money exchanged in the world of cryptocurrency, but do those dollars represent anything of real value to real people? And economists sometimes use this thing called utils, which is not real in any sense. There are not real calculations done with utils that are meaningful. There's not a standard agreed upon measurement of what a util is, how much utility something has, in the way that we have grams and pounds, and there's a scientific measurement of this. But there needs to be some meaningful way for economists to say, yes, there's dollars in this industry, but how much value does it provide to humanity? I think the production of food provides far more value than cryptocurrency to our society. But we measure these two industries with the same dollars in terms of growth, in terms of how much money is made. That is ridiculous. We in economics need to have some reckoning where we agree that the production of food has more value than crypto markets. And I think that's really scary that we're in a place where we're measuring the economic growth and success in dollars for these two things. There needs to be some measurement or equation or theory around real value of things in our economy. The fact that there's not, and the fact that the TA responded is like, wow, that's so interesting. I've never heard anything like that. And I'm like, how many people get up and go to work every day in the field of economics and like have never thought like, why don't we have a measurement for the real value of something beyond the currency used in this society, which is dependent on markets and a billion other factors? It's just absurd. But crypto is one of those things where it's like, why are we ruining our planet, burning our planet for people to invest fiat currency into a pretend thing? Blockchain technology is very real. But meme coins, Dogecoin, that's nothing real. And there was some idea that it could replace fiat currency when really Dogecoin went up in value because many people put fiat currencies, so like dollars and euros, currencies created in a closed economy by the central bank or government, because they invested these currencies into it, it got value. It's like trading in a market for something that doesn't exist. Like, why would we destroy our economy and put all of this computing power into something that is just people gambling over memes and using it as an exchange for, illicit services and drugs and crimes? That's what crypto's used for a lot. And so it's really ridiculous. Like, blockchain technology, sure, it's good, it has its function, but the world of crypto should be made illegal at this point. Like, I'm fine saying that. It's unnecessary.
One last story we wanted to talk to you about is this Wall Street Journal story about Biden's cognitive abilities. This sent shockwaves through the liberal chattering class and the Biden supporter camp today. In this story, the Wall Street Journal reports that, now I see you're sitting down, but maybe hold on to your desk or your chair. Behind the scenes, Biden is showing signs of cognitive decline. I was just as shocked as you both are.
My monocle just fell out.
Seeing him on TV, I can't believe it. Seeing him on TV, seeing how he is, and then to think that behind the scenes, he's slowing down, he's nodding off, he's not all there. Did you both read this piece, and were you just as surprised as I was?
I read it because Jordan sent it to me. I was not surprised. Rob, what's your answer?
I was just shocked. When I see Joe Biden, I see this is a guy that's got it all together. He looks great. He sounds great, energetic, coherent. So I was surprised by this. And listen, like you can point to the fact that there's a lot of like Republican sources that are quoted in this story. And then, of course, you had all these kind of like high-ranking members of the Democratic Party that came through and said, whoa, no, I contributed a quote to this, and I said that he was actually really totally fine, and it wasn't included. So you might be able to frame it as some kind of a hit piece or anything like that. But like, it's the whole reality of it is undeniable. Like, this is all stories that completely match with everything that's been totally obvious and observable about Biden for years now, like leading up to, this was a major point of discussion leading up to the 2020 election in the first place. And yeah, I mean, you can look back at clips of Biden interviews, even from as recently as like 2015, 2016, and he's way, way more energetic, coherent. Like there's been a visible, noticeable decline in his ability to kind of like to speak coherently and to, do the things that a politician needs to do. So, I mean, it's just kind of amazing for Democrats to start coming out of the woodwork and claim that this is some kind of like disingenuous hit piece when all it is just confirming anything that like anybody with eyes and ears that pays attention to what Biden does can notice for themselves.
It's really well said, Rob. Yeah. The fact that he's closing his eyes, President Biden's closing his eyes in meetings with members of Congress at the White House for seconds at a time, to the point where they think he's trailed off, he's not staying on topic. Okay, what's happening behind the scenes is Joe Biden has clear signs of cognitive decline. So what's happening behind the scenes confirms what we see in the scenes. Like, we all see Biden performing terribly in press conferences, not knowing where to walk next. Remember, he held up an index card with like instructions on it, which felt like a cry for help. Like, everyone, I'm not doing well. They're telling me what to do. Please help. Like, he showed the press that he had an index card with clear cues on it like 2 years ago. So the fact that this is surprising to members of the Democratic Party is reminiscent of some kind of family where the beloved patriarch of the family is not doing well, maybe has dementia, and his children are just in denial. They're like, how would you say that about grandpa? He's fine. Because they don't want to admit that he's like at the end. They're not ready to let go. That's how I feel about these establishment Democrats that make excuses for Biden.
Yeah, that's the thing that frustrates me. Like this whole thing, they're all upset because the narrative that they have tried to sell us for a couple of years now, and you see this compiled in supercuts, they're all saying the exact same thing. It is, oh, when I meet with him face to face, when I meet with him in the Oval Office, behind the scenes, he's sharp, he's acute, he's paying attention, he's engaged, and they all say it, and it's so obviously bullshit. Rob and I were talking before the show, when Jon Stewart came back to The Daily Show, the very first monologue he did, joked about that, and it's like, okay, can we see that publicly? Because privately, he's apparently this razor-sharp whiz kid, but then publicly he goes out and he stammers over his words, he mumbles. In the recent Time interview, he was saying Hamas needs to, parentheses, unintelligible, and the war will be over. Like, he can't have a coherent conversation.
That whole Time interview is like riddled with like just wild
Insane
shit.
In 2019, early 2020, in the primary, both Julian Castro and Cory Booker pointed this out. They pointed it out then that he was showing signs of cognitive decline. People saw that, and because Biden was polling really low, that was permissible. No one thought he was going to be president, honestly, us included. And
Yes,
especially.
I was just as surprised as anybody.
Sure. Then, as soon as he got the nomination, you saw pundits, you saw the very same people describe it as a right-wing conspiracy theory. It was unfair. It's inaccurate. All of this spin started to get ginned up. We don't have to buy this. The idea that this piece, I'm not crediting Wall Street Journal's reporting, but a lot of the criticism was, you didn't talk to a single Democrat who agreed. Yes, because it's an election year and they're trying to get him reelected. They're not going to be honest about this. They all know it's true and they're lying. It's not on Wall Street Journal to go get, I mean, it kind of is, but it wouldn't change the outcome of the piece. The piece is still there. You could see with our own eyes, every appearance, he is not the same person that he was 8 years ago.
To tell the public it's dangerous if you criticize Biden and say he has cognitive decline, like, how could you do that? We could have fascism if you say that. I'm sorry, if we're not allowed to point out obvious realities, we're already on a slippery slope into fascism. If it's politically necessary to lie about what we all observe, what kind of freedom and democracy do we really have? Like, I think we need to be very critical of how they're promising a future of like Biden will be the alternative to fascism, when we all saw this week him drastically change his stance on the border, going back on his campaign promises about asylum seekers. Like, it's just this delusion that Democrats, that our establishment Democrats collectively have. Like, you can say, yes, Biden is a better choice than Trump, and he has policies that I think are better than the reality that Trump's policies and leadership would create. But I also believe he is experiencing severe cognitive decline. Both of those things can be true, and we can recognize that a president is their cabinet. And we're not voting for someone who will make every decision in the federal government. We're voting someone who will pick people for positions, who has many appointees they're responsible for deciding on. They're like the hiring manager for the federal government. That's important. Talk about that. But to say that we're not allowed to comment on his stutter because he's always had a stutter and now we're being ableist, like, really? We can pull up C-SPAN and watch Senate speeches from 10 years ago. He wasn't stuttering then. The stutter came back because of the cognitive decline.
Also, they were using the stutter excuse when he was just saying things that weren't true.
Yeah.
Like meeting Nelson Mandela was attributed to stutter.
When he went on a secret mission to South Africa and busted him out of jail. Like, we know, no, sir, that's not a stutter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it's like, I think, and like you're saying, you can and should point out that, like, you know, Biden and the Democrats in certain areas and with certain policies are the better choice or the better option than Republicans. But I think it's also important to point out areas where there's significant crossover in these kind of policies. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean. It's not just about Biden's cognitive abilities or cognitive decline. I think it just really speaks to the kind of like cult-like nature of this kind of partisan view of politics, where it's not only can you not comment on Biden's like cognitive issues, but it's like none of these big glaring problems, these big glaring like alarm bells that should be going off are having any kind of impact on any of these people. The whole uncommitted campaign. Oh no, this is like they're having this tantrum. It's not a problem. They're gonna fall in line when it comes down to it. The fact that like people that have made the border their kind of major cause that they focus on, they're freaking out about talk about a Freudian stutter there, about Joe Biden's like border policies and the crossover with Donald Trump. They're freaking out. No, that's not a problem. And in fact, it's you that the problem that you're even mentioning any of this. The fact that people have been correctly hammering Biden on the fact that he's been supporting fully this last 8 months of this absolute barbaric criminality and supporting the Israeli government for every single thing that they've done, and refusing to see that that's like a problem, that's alienating people, that in all of these issues with the border, with Gaza, with law and order, all these different ways that like the Biden's policies and Biden's stances on these issues are demoralizing and demobilizing these like highly engaged potential voters that you need to rely on to win elections. And they just refuse to see that this is a problem at all. And all they can do is just like insult people, anyone that's going to raise any of these issues. And yeah, I mean, it shows how similar I think a lot of these folks are, these really kind of hardcore Democratic partisans, to the people on the other side that they would describe as these like Trump MAGA cultists. Like they have the same kind of like cult-like devotion to the who they see as their like betters in the higher echelons of this political party, and they just refuse to accept any kind of valid criticism about it. And like I said, they're ignoring all these glaring alarms that should be going off about the reality that they're heading into in November, refusing to address any of it. And you know, that's not leading them to a very good position, but they can't seem to see this.
Right. The uniparty is increasingly becoming this phenomenon that's embraced by people who used to be maybe favoring Trump, people who are in the middle, libertarians. There's, of course, always going to be this group of people that calls Biden a communist, which is hilarious to every communist. They hate Biden. He's obviously a capitalist, and a corporate capitalist at that. We've seen very limited use of his power in a meaningful way to address the oligopoly that rules our economy. Now, there are people who see the commonalities between Republicans and Democrats and see that both of them, while they have differing approaches, differing narratives, they agree with one thing, and it's the corporate rule we have in our country. They're willing to protect the flows of capital and the wealthiest people being in charge of how our economy runs. And they're willing to use our existing political structure to protect that. And I think that's what most people have given up on politics. They haven't given up on politics. They see our politics for what it is. And they've realized that not much that they do will produce a real change in their lives. And I think that's fine. I think talking down to those people as if they're stupid or irresponsible just confirms their beliefs that you're being condescending to them. You think you're better than them, and that's why you should be in charge, and that's why you should hold the purse strings, etc. And so it's almost like deplorables from Hillary Clinton is happening, but not in one statement. It's like happening with the Democratic Party in very many statements, very slowly. But the Republicans are doing it as well to their voters. Like there are people saying that, yeah, Trump made promises and he's not keeping them. And he didn't make things better for small business owners. And it seems like he really does fight for the larger corporations, given the tax cuts we saw under Trump and how they're expiring for everyday middle class and working families. But the corporate tax cuts on corporate profits are staying permanently. Like, I think people are realizing it on both sides, how much the uniparty is a thing and how much it revolves around keeping the economy one where it's, the ruling class is the few wealthy people and we're all living under their terrible corporate rule.